All right, looks like we've got 4 of us, so I'll wait for some more folks to roll in. Can folks see the screen?
Yeah.
All right, looks like we got a few folks here. So want to go over our vision for the day and then ask for visions for next year. So Marlena got her second COVID shot and just texted to say she's not feeling well enough to come to class. So we're not going to have her lecture, but Sharon just confirmed. So she's going to be coming in and talking about race and climate change, and it should be awesome. She's going to join us at 2. So before that, we want to talk about next year, planning for next year and doing more publicity this year. One of the criticisms we had was that we put on such great content, but we didn't reach a very large audience. And so we're trying to figure out how to get more institutional support from the school to reach a bigger audience. So we need to come up with our draft of our theme and schedule for next year and what kind of content we want to have and kind of work on some branding. So Tiffany's been working on a promotional video to try to get out our ideas from this year and get more followers and get more engagement for next year. So we'll have ideas that folks have about that. Then we'll go over the draft schedule for next year and get your input. Then we'll have Sharon, and then we will peer edit papers. So wanted to ask folks, I'll make this a little bigger. If you had ideas to address this critique that we got in our feedback forums, that the content was really great, but there wasn't a lot of attendance, right? We did some great social media posts, came up with some great flyers. We didn't get a lot of followers. We didn't get a lot of attendees. So if folks had ideas about that, other than doing the stuff that Tiffany and Tanya are going to work on with doing more outreach, not just before Social Justice Week, but after, building up our website content and our social media presence, we wanted to have a little chance to talk about how you all think we could increase our attendance. Yeah, go ahead, Jaden.
Okay, couldn't find my mouse. Yes, some ideas would be, and I don't know exactly how, like the grant money, if it has any stipulations, but if with some of the monies, if that could be used to buy some advertising. And I mean, like minimal, like some social media advertising, whether that be on Instagram or some Facebook ads, because that way you would target who your audience is. So there's some targeted marketing. And then because some of the comments that I read were like, hey, I would love, I have connections in the community, so like talking with staff or with some of these other clubs and putting out a message to them of, kind of that networking idea of, let's use the power of the networking and get into the community sooner.
So like a survey where we call for input, like ideas for sessions or activities or field trips or movie screenings or whatever people would want to do.
Or the idea of being able to connect with the community for those resources of people that are already doing something. You know, they already are having a social message, or are volunteering, or are doing something that we just maybe not know about. And they, you know, that we can get plugged into, or they can get plugged into us, vice versa.
Great.
Or, you know, getting two people connected together that may be able to co-work on something. Just sometimes it's just that we're the medium, and just being able to facilitate.
Great.
I
Oh,
Isael, you have your hand up, and I think you started talking.
yeah. So one way I guess we can maybe get more followers would be to maybe print out stickers of our IG thing. Because I think we can make like the little codes thing where they can scan it with their phone and then post them around campus, since I guess we're headed towards that way. And then put them through like high traffic areas, like the library and stuff like that. Get people to join.
Yeah, Tanya had made stickers before. Wait, Tanya, was it you? Was it
Yeah, Danielle and I made
Danielle?
stickers for last year's Social Justice Week. I like the QR code idea though. I think that might be better. And if we can't do it like on a sticker, we can do it like on a flyer. I'm not too well versed on QR codes, so if you know how to do that, or if you know someone that knows how to do that, that'd be pretty cool.
Yeah, one of the things that Dean
There's an app for that. Sorry.
suggested was having students who had been in the Social Justice Week class or participated go to a bunch of classrooms in the fall to convince people to take the class, and to convince people to come to Social Justice Week, and to convince the professors to not have class that day and send people. So she wants kind of like ambassadors for Social Justice Week. So that could be an interesting thing if people went into the classrooms, dropped some stickers, wrote some stuff on the board. Was someone else talking earlier? Joe, your hand's up.
Yeah, one of the suggestions I had kind of moving forward, I feel, especially with like COVID, just kind of looking on some like bright side of the aspects of it, I feel like we should consider looking at like a possible hybrid model for Social Justice Week, in terms of having some on-campus events that are, if it works with people's schedule, they can be able to come on campus, find the space in the ballrooms, having that, but also offering the opportunity to have like those virtual events too, because I feel like, some people don't have the convenience to leave their jobs or works to come, or leave their classes to come to certain events that might be happening in the ballroom. So it's good to like have some events scattered around throughout the day on like via Zoom or whatever virtual kind of video platform you want to think about. But incorporating some type of hybrid model, I think would be kind of it would be more adaptable in terms of us being more flexible and who we can support, how we can support, and the number of people we can outreach to for Social Justice Week.
And do you think that would be where we stream all the events, but then some of the events we host just on Zoom, or in our streams we give everybody the ability to participate even if we have the live one? Just making sure I write down the notes on what you mean by hybrid.
Yeah, so like for the in-campus events that we're able to host like in the ballrooms, we stream those and we're able to post those on our website, as well as the virtual events maybe via Zoom like we did this year. And then we have those events where, students can participate, or audience members can participate with panelists like we had in that format. And also, recording that and also posting that to our website too. So, everyone has access to it, whether they were here or whether they will make it to the event or not.
Yeah, I was gonna say I really like the QR code idea, and also maybe making flyers just for that we can put out on establishments that like allow us to, and that would like add more engagement from the community outside of Sonoma State.
I have kind of a question. I'm not too sure how they're doing this next year, but are they having like, like those like a welcome day or any of those days where, the clubs have like the different booths open and tables and giving away snacks, or something like that? I was just curious. I don't know about COVID, but I think that would be a great way to kind of connect too.
Does anybody know?
Yeah. So I'm going through like the rechartering process right now with my club. So I'm being told to plan for in-person events for the fall semester, even if we might not fully go back. I know there are going to be some classes that are doing in person, like within sociology and stuff. So I think there will be opportunities for tabling. If not in the fall, then I feel like by spring next year, for sure, there will be those tabling opportunities. We tried to table last year, but it's kind of difficult to do with just like two people. So I feel like maybe that's something that either the class can do with Soci Club, because you do have to be, it has to be like a club that has a table. I don't know if it can be just anyone. I think it either has to be like a club or an organization to table. And then you have to like go and schedule it for like certain times. When we were on campus last spring, Tuesdays at noon were the best time. That's because there was like more people on Tuesdays, and noon to 1 was like the time that everybody's either walking to the rec center or to the student center or just like walking in that little space. But yeah, I like that idea. I think tabling is a really good way to just get the word out. But you do have to kind of have like interesting things on your table. So if we have like stickers or books even from last year, or like a little like snacks, yeah, it has to be like packaged food that you can like give to people. Just like opportunities for students to like actually want to come up to your table, because if it's just like flyers and stickers, which it was like, that's it, what it essentially was when Danielle and I did it, like almost nobody came up to us. But you also have to like be super outgoing and just be like, hey, like come to social justice week, or like if we had like a big
Our
poster
photo
or
booth.
something.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Our selfie booth for all the vain people who don't want stickers but want a picture.
Or like I know we have like the frames and stuff, so I feel like
Mhm.
that would be cool to incorporate that.
We used a really cool idea when I was at the JC, and it is a little wheel that you would spin, like the Wheel of Fortune, and you could literally label the topics whatever you wanted. So, because we're promoting this particular social justice week, we could actually have them be social justice topics, or, the names of people that are particularly, and then people spin the wheel and we can figure out what it is, right? Like they just get the person that they spin the wheel on, all right, and then we tell them briefly who that person is and give them a piece of candy. Everybody loves to spin the wheel, man. Everybody loves it.
Not everybody loves candy. In one of my first years at the night class, I gave caffeinated candy to keep people awake, and I got a complaint in my SETIs that I was infantilizing the students by treating them like children and giving them candy bribes. Can't please everyone,
That's messed up because I would have appreciated that.
right? Me too.
What
How
about
many students are going to be here for 2022? Jaden, out of our group, or?
Yes. I don't know how many were seniors this year.
Danielle and Isael are raising their hands. You'll be here for next year, or you wanted to chat?
I was gonna say something else.
Lindsay will be here.
I was gonna say, why don't we try to get our speakers for next year, like communicate a message like, hey, do you want to post this flyer and also promote it on your guys' social media? Because most of our speakers have decent amount of a following, and if they could get their people to join our, even if they just join their Zoom session, that'd be great. The numbers would get pumped up a lot.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, Isabel, I like that idea. And maybe this is also a comment that I saw in the survey responses, was like, if we don't have like a flyer for that specific speaker, if we have like a save the date, once we get the dates finalized for next year, if we can create that and be like, hey, save the date first week of April, or like second week of April, whenever it is that we have it, like this event is happening, like follow us for more updates, or like keep up with us on like all of our website or whatever, like, and we can share that with our speakers from this year and like past speakers and other organizations to share with their followers.
I think that can also go in like the email campaigns and stuff. That can be all under that umbrella, which would be great.
Yeah, Dean Carlton and the people from the, they're calling it SASSY, the social justice research folks that piggybacked on ours, wanted us to have the schedule done and a save the date before fall registration. So in fall, people can register for this class in the spring, and we could do informational sessions about it in the spring, but also so the faculty can plan their classes in the spring, because not we all, many faculty start planning their syllabi in the fall for the spring class. So Dean Carlton wanted that to happen in like August or September. So yeah. These are all great ideas. I'm writing them all in my very long to-do list. Jaden, do you have your hand up?
I do. I liked that idea of the social justice ambassadors. I think that was really good. I'm not sure who brought that up, but that sounded like it would be something that would be worthwhile and promoting of the, what it is that we're doing, not just the club. Because honestly, I know that there is a club, but I didn't really get. It's not, a club wouldn't be for everybody, right? But and being an ambassador, I think, would be something that would be good at being able to communicate the message for those out there, and get more interest, and potentially have a bigger class, which bigger class would be more funds, right? Yeah, more fun.
More fun or more funds? No, we don't get more money if there's more people in the class.
Oh, you don't? Okay. Well, more fun then.
Sorry, I misunderstood. I'm having fun no matter how many people are in this class, but
it's great.
Get a certain amount of teaching units. And then our grant, it doesn't matter how many people take the class. So our grant is $6,500. They cut half of it this year and then added it back because of COVID. It's a 5-year grant, and we have to maintain eligibility with enough people coming to the events to make it keep happening, and to show why we need to be funded in the future for the events. But from the meeting that I had with Dean Carlton, she doesn't think that they're going to cut the IRA grant that gives us the money to pay the speakers and book the rooms and do the website and stuff like that. So that is good. And she doesn't foresee this class getting cut. There's lots of classes that are getting cut, but she doesn't see this one because it's not in a department, it's in the school. So.
And then did you say that it was potential that this could be in person?
The event or the class?
The event.
Yeah, so I think that the dean really wants everybody to be back on campus, and she was thinking a hybrid thing, kind of like Joe described, but I think what she was thinking was we would have everyone have the option to have that community networking thing that a lot of people are missing, and we would stream it all. I wasn't thinking that we would do specific sessions just on Zoom, but for accessibility and equity issues, it would make sense that we would have some things just on Zoom so people aren't participating unequally. Like if we do something about undocumented folks and folks don't want to travel or they have nervousness about that or money, and we do it all on Zoom, that makes sense. Or something about accessibility and disability justice and folks have a harder time, getting to Sonoma State, then we could do that one all on Zoom, and that levels the playing field. So yeah, I think that from the dean's perspective, she's concerned about giving students the college experience that they're missing.
Fair enough. But I do like the second part that you said, and that is making sure that it is, both hybrid. Like there is that accessibility component for whoever that may be. I think
And
it's
that
important to include that.
That could look like all the speakers having, having like one mic, but also having a laptop in front of them so they can engage on the chat and stuff like that. And some of them could be muted and some of them can be on the mic, where they can engage. And then the students that are in the room can also facilitate that. And we can figure out how that looks. When we did it last year, we just had students in the back of the room with a camera on the whole room and on the speaker and picking up the audio from there. But I think that the campus services, I can't remember exactly what they're called, the folks that run the ballroom will definitely have a more advanced Zoom setup by next year.
Okay.
I have a couple more ideas.
Great.
So I'm not sure if this was already said, but as you guys were talking about the ambassador, what about student alumni that have taken the class and done the events? And, because I remember putting an idea in the thing, and you said, Professor Henry, that you reached out but didn't hear any from any other faculty, but potentially using student alumni to speak to the different departments, history, anthropology, criminal justice, like whoever, kinesiology, whenever we're specifically holding, or, we have our recordings or our speakers from events that would be relevant to the material they're teaching in those classes, specifically connected to current events that might be happening in the news. There's always something going on in our country right now where the grassroots work that we're doing right in our local community, we can actually show people, look, and here's what's going on in Sonoma County. This person created this or that. So if an alumni like myself, I would totally make myself available to pop into a class and speak for 15 minutes and say, this is what I did at Social Justice Week. This is what I learned. And this is how I'm applying it to these current events in my job that I'm doing right now, making a difference in this giant issue, so that we can sort of see how that acting locally can impact globally social justice. So that's the first thing. That's my first idea. Second idea, and I also put this one in the thing, I'm super curious about connecting with the media or communications department of SSU and like possibly editing some of our recordings so we take meaningful chunks of them and create like a small movie that we can like use as a promotional material and say these are previous speakers, or something like along that line.
That's a great segue. Tiffany, do you want to talk about getting input on the themes for the video you're making that Shannon just accidentally introduced?
Right. No, that's great. So I started putting together the video, watching all of the content from that week. And I think ideally we were going to do maybe like a wrap up video, like this is how it went. I think it's like what you're saying. I think it can get a little bit bigger because the content is so great. And so so we just wanted to see if anyone else has input on what they actually want to see in the video. One thing that I kind of wanted to add, I mean, of course, all the content with the events, but I kind of wanted to add and get like a feel to see what you guys think about adding any of like the Chauvin trial or adding any social justice kind of events that are going on, like in the States or worldwide, that you wanted to kind of implement in the video. Maybe something that stood out to you that like a speaker spoke about, or anything that for content to kind of show like the world's view, kind of like what you're saying, Shannon. That makes sense. If anyone has anything that comes to their mind, just let me know.
Could you kind of let us know the flow you have so far? You mentioned to me that you've got like an MLK clip, and then you have clips from each session, and some students are in them. Can you, before folks give you feedback, you might have already covered it, like Shannon's psychic vision. So can you tell us what your vision is so far? And then after, maybe folks can respond to things to add.
Definitely. So the whole thing is playing over this audio. It's just kind of like a lo-fi audio to kind of get things excited. And so in the intro, there is just kind of like a Martin Luther King kind of voiceover as we kind of enter into the video. And then we have a student kind of speaking about, I wish I had it rendered, but we have a student speaking about what they actually, Tanya too, sorry. Yes. And then Tanya's in there too, speaking about kind of like an intro. And then we go into Dr. Greg Saris and then Dr. Sawyer, and then just a couple clips that I found was super impactful and maybe could like sum up their presentation or their talk. And so I went through and I have most of the speakers in. But yeah, I just wanted to kind of push it out to you guys and see if there's any other feedback or anything you guys really want to see that was like impactful.
What you have sounds great. I don't have anything to add to that. I think it all sounds really good.
Okay, so we have the Chauvin trial. We have a little bit of that in there. Any other events or in the news or anything like we should just kind of add in there?
I mean, I think you kind of covered everything. Maybe like the only thing that I would suggest would be, because I don't know like what parts of the Chauvin trial like is it like the verdict or like people celebrating after the verdict or like what?
It was a verdict clip, just literally like reading the verdict. But I can totally change it or manipulate it, anything.
I think it would be nice to have like maybe video footage from last summer's protests of things that were happening like after that clip went viral, because it did inspire like mass protests, the biggest protests that we've seen in the United States since the civil rights movement. And not just within the United States, but it also was a global movement too. So I think if we include some of those video clips and audio clips of people from around the world and maybe from around the country, that might be really powerful, because I think the Chauvin trial information is great, but there's still so much work that needs to be done, because that wasn't justice. It was like one aspect of accountability. Yeah. I have like more thoughts on that, but I don't think this is the place for that. So I'm just gonna leave it there. But I
It
think that
was the
sounds
place
great.
for that last week. We had a long talk about it last week, but you were gone. Was I unmuted there?
No, yeah, I heard you. Thank
Oh,
you.
okay.
Sorry, I'm just reading Joe's comment in the chat. I mean, yeah, if we want to, I feel like that would be okay. I'm just my only worry, I guess, would just be like, do we want to like hold space to show, like, does he deserve the space to be in our video type of thing? I don't know.
I think what you said, like totally, I started thinking about forgot her name, as like Jacqueline. She's the girl who her video went viral. So even if we want to add like anything, we can definitely add like maybe a little bit of her video and a little bit of her audio or something when she was speaking at the trial, just so we can shed light, like what you're saying, we can shed light more on like the people that kind of like put themselves out there to help this trial kind of go along and add some, like evidentiary support and all of that. So, but to highlight her a little bit, because she was definitely a star, and she was 13, 14, and she stood on trial and all of that, or she she spoke. So I like that. Is that what you're thinking, Tanya, a little bit?
I was thinking more so like videos of like actual protests that happened, because I know there were like days in like LA where it was like for like weeks people would like shut down like the highway, or like footage of like Golden Gate Bridge, like people just flooding the Golden Gate Bridge, or like I know there was like a lot of like property destruction, but honestly, I don't really care about property destruction, but that's like a whole other conversation as well, of like people bringing down statues of Confederate soldiers, like, or like throwing that down, like there was that whole conversation. Yeah, I worry a little bit about putting the footage of, I don't know her name, so I apologize, but of her into the video, just because I don't want to like include possibly traumatic like audio or video into the video clip.
Okay, I hear you. So like not like triggering stuff, but definitely we need to have some protest videos because those were like very epic and yeah, I get what you're saying. Definitely. I love it. Thank you. Thank you. I think that will definitely make it very real and make it more lively. So it's not just like, oh, we're in these Zoom spaces and that's what they were talking about. But like, no, like this happened on the streets and stuff like that. So definitely, I'm gonna look up some of those videos for sure. Thank you.
I just dropped in the chat one that students wrote about in their weekly feedback that they liked the You Broke the Contract video that we watched in class before you started joining us, Tiffany. I think, Jaden, you were starting to talk?
I just had a question based on the conversation. And so this is directed to Tiffany. And that is on the trial and, you know, showing the video clip. What would we tie it back to for social justice? Would we tie it back to a speaker? Would we tie it back? I mean, obviously there's a theme we could tie it back to, but I mean, what would we tie it back that's associated to SSU, not just sensationalism?
Definitely. I think they said it in the chat where we talked about the like prison reform, things like that. I get what you're saying. It can definitely.
I mean, obviously it's more than sensationalism. Obviously it's a big deal, and you know, there's a
Right.
lot of things that came out of this, and it's important. So forgive me, I didn't mean for it to come out that way.
No, not at all. No, I think that's a super valid question. And I think, I mean, now I'm going to be thinking of that like in the back of my head as like I continue editing and to make sure that's cohesive. But yeah, so I did add the audio at the end, but I think I can move the audio around to kind of after Leroy, after he spoke, I can kind of like put that in there. And then maybe at the end or the beginning, I can do like the people protesting to kind of like round that out a little bit. But no, but I love that question. I think that's great for an editing question, just to make sure it's cohesive and stuff. So okay. Yeah. Oh, spoken word. I did include his spoken word. Yeah, Dr. Sawyer. I love that. So some of his audio from that is in there. It's great.
Thanks, Tiffany.
Thank you for the feedback.
Well, I know Tiffany Lopez, by the way.
Yes.
All right, so I think if other folks have thoughts, Tiffany's email's on the syllabus, and I have the screen share going here. Going to open up the ideas that we talked, or that I talked about with the dean and the folks at the, what they're calling SASSY, Undergraduate Research Symposium. And wanted to get some input from you all on what you think our overarching theme should be. And I feel like this is kind of a chicken and egg where we can pick some speakers we really want and then decide the theme, or we can pick a theme and then decide speakers. But generally with the other faculty, we thought that 3 sessions at the end where students present their social justice research would be good. And then every year there's this Nieves Barton lecture series where they have big money to get someone big. Like 2020, it was supposed to be Angela Davis and then Noam Chomsky. So Angela spoke during our social justice week. So we thought maybe the dean's going to talk to them about doing the keynote with someone who's like would pull in a lot of people, and then have an awards, and this time have a reception where the dean would pay for like food and schmoozing. And then the first days, we were thinking maybe a couple of years ago, we did a tour of the Grayton Rancheria. So maybe starting it off with a tour, and then talking about things on campus first, maybe, if folks like this idea. We had been contacted by the Title IX folks on campus about doing some kind of bystander intervention training. And then there's these different things happening on campus, like the Social Justice Black Lives Matter Task Force Committee, and maybe by then they'll have some kind of report and talking about changes they're making. Maybe there'll be a report on the campus climate survey that a bunch of you probably took. But we were thinking, or I was thinking, and the ISA TAs thought it might make sense in terms of scheduling to do the students and staff and faculty sessions during like work hours. So each day would first be a student session, then the next would be like faculty or staff, or like a job fair one day that would be the career center, and then have the community groups kind of after that later in the day so people could get off of work or get off school or childcare and have those be in the afternoons. So I just wanted to get general feedback on, does this flow look kind of good? Nothing is final. We haven't contacted anyone yet, but of like designated student time and faculty time and community time. And with this flow, would we be able to figure out who we would want to speak and what the theme would be? What do folks think?
I guess real quick, if I can add, just for starters, I know Dr. Saris wanted at Great and Rancheria. He wanted to do more events this year, but he couldn't, and so I know he's definitely open to a lot of the events, and I'm sure you have like direct communication with him. I just have a couple classes with him, and yeah, he definitely wanted like to host things, and so I think that's a great idea.
What do folks think about having students, then faculty and staff, and then community? Does that timing work for you all with your class schedules? Mixing student and educators to host. The sessions that are hands-on sound interesting. Good. All right, well, not hearing a lot of feedback on that, do we want to figure out what chicken and egg order we should go in with thinking about who we'd really want to speak and then coming up with a theme? Or do we want to come up with a theme and then figure out who we would really want to hear from? We got a lot of good suggestions in our feedback forms and a lot of suggestions from last year too. What's an example of a community group session? Great question. So to me, that is anything where we paid people. So that would be like restorative justice circles in prison, human trafficking, environmental justice, canceling students' debt, food justice, anything that wasn't done by like a staff or a student. Speakers then theme. Great. All right, Danielle, who do you want to hear?
Me personally, I like had a social justice week, like who I would be interested in hearing about.
Yep.
Well, I would like to hear like Michelle Alexander or Elliot Curry or I don't remember their names, but the people who had come into our 450 class who were part of the TGIJP, right?
Oh, well, that's doable for sure.
I
I can get anyone that's come into my classes before, but Michelle Alexander, it's like $15,000. But you liked Elliot Curie
as well, yeah.
because he came 2 years ago?
Yeah, he did. I didn't get to go, but I listened to the recording of it.
Okay. And TGIJP would definitely be like, here's ways you can get involved in supporting trans and gender nonconforming people locally. And I don't know that Elliot Curie, I think he's more academic, right? Or does he have ways to get involved
I
specifically?
think he's more academic, but I like I read his book for the juvenile justice class, and I really liked that. And he did a lot of kind of interviews with juveniles, so I think it'd be cool to kind of get someone who can talk about juvenile justice.
Social justice local? What's that? Jaden?
Like, for example, it doesn't have to be this, like legal aid or just somebody that is doing social justice work from the legal side of it. Obviously, not yourself, unless you want to do a presentation, but somebody outside
No,
of
you
you.
know I like to hide in the background.
Yeah, somebody outside of you that is doing social justice work that would like to, share their passion from the legal side
Well,
of things.
I have lots of those connections that owe me lots of favors, so they'll come. And Israel, is that a football player?
No, he's
No.
he hosts the show Uncomfortable Conversation with a Black Man.
Oh, I
And
thought I
we're-
just looked up this Nigerian American linebacker.
No, that's definitely
I
not.
was like, okay, Uncomfortable Conversations. He's the second one to come up.
Yeah.
Great.
He over the summer he had like he did a video with the Petaluma police, and I guess we could maybe get him to talk about how that went. If he thought like that their responses were genuine. But like he has a whole series on his Instagram. It's great.
Great. Here it is. Petaluma Police Department. All right, I'm going to drop that into the chat for folks. Maybe I'll listen to this on my break. So those are all good. I think figuring out the themes between those is harder, like a conversation, using conversations to create change could be Emmanuel's. Yeah, who else would folks like to see?
James would be great next year again if we could
James
get him.
Birch?
Yeah.
Okay.
Especially if we could get him in person, that'd be great.
Love and light. Okay.
I like the presenters that like showed how to do something or showed the change or taught a skill or taught here's how you can make the change or how you can get involved. I don't know if that helps in when we're looking at who we can have, because I think yes, it is an educational institution, academic, that if we can also produce and enhance and influence, and I don't know if those are all the right words, but I think that like when we had workshops and panels and different things like that, where they could show how to do a skill. So if it was like sexual assault, using part of that time of, how do you defend yourself? Or, there's different ways that you could approach that. But again, it's an action item. And I think that's a different, that's something that
So maybe our theme could be skill building for social justice, and we ask each person to teach a skill. So Richie could teach, de-escalation. Love and Light folks can teach about grassroots organizing. James Birch could teach about intervening in police violence. Emmanuel could talk about having hard conversations. TGI can talk about how do you do support for incarcerated people, stuff like that.
yes.
So what do folks think of that as a theme? Social justice skill building, building social justice skills. Do we have wordsmiths amongst us?
I think it sounds great. It's nice to have some skills. Rather than just talking about it and informational, it's nice to walk away with something that we like specifically learned about and can do moving forward.
The speaker that I put in there, I'm not too sure if you guys heard of him, but he specializes in the Aztec calendar, and he goes around speaking at schools and different things about the like the history, but also like the application, because it's also like it includes like the Mayan calendar and things like that. So he talks about the observance of that and the kind of ecological aspects that went into making that calendar, and it's just kind of like indigenous awareness also. I mean, it is a skill to know how to read that. And I mean, it's a really old calendar. And I think for indigenous students, or that if we have a theme there or any of those speakers, I think that would go hand in hand. Yeah, check him out. He's also on a very popular podcast I can put in, an LA native podcast. So
Maybe we could have multiple, like, we could call it like ancestral skills or something, where we have different traditions where people teach a specific skill.
definitely, I think the term is like traditional knowledge, TK, right? Traditional knowledge, something, there's an acronym for it, but teaching like traditional knowledge, like what you're saying.
I'm in a series of ancestral skills workshops, but they're not the same as like Mayan calendar. It's like flint knapping with a knife and like weaving your own, you can get natural fibers from plants that you harvest, and then you can make your own cordage. And so, yeah, I know people don't call it primitive skills anymore. They used to call it that, but something where we recognize different skills from different cultures, and people could come and talk about whatever else beyond. I mean, obviously there's a lot of people in Sonoma County. We could have folks come, the fire series that Dr. Tom did was amazing, like hearing about basket weaving from Hazelnuts, the Kashaya folks. I just did a burn with them this weekend, a cultural, they do cultural burning. It wasn't a cultural burn. It wasn't on I mean, it's all their land, but it was on a nature preserve. And so, we could do a couple of them in a session. Social justice training for change. Soja skills with like 3 Z's. It's like Skrillex, but it's a cool hashtag / a startup. JK, I'm not relevant. I just pretend to be relevant to the internet. Empowerment through social justice. That's cool. Tanya likes that.
Yeah, I like that because that could be like either self-empowerment or group empowerment, community empowerment. Like it encompasses so much. So like if we have different speakers, like, or like if our intention is to empower people, I feel like either if they have a skill that they want to share with us that we could do, or if we just want to have a conversation, like that could be empowering as well.
Great. Well, I think that all of those are great. Maybe folks can marinate on them and send some messages about what they think, or let me know in the feedback at the end of class. I think now is probably a good time for a wiggle snack break before our guest comes, so we can have the most attention possible for Dr. Fuller. So I think let's take 10 minutes, and she's going to join us for half an hour. So if you want to review her faculty bio, I'm going to post it in the chat. It's also on the syllabus as well. Oh, there's a toolkit. That's cool. Great. Thank you for posting that. All right. So I'm going to stop the recording. Give us a break. Hi, Sharon. It looks like you're here early. Thank you for joining us.
I am. How are you?
Oops. Sorry, I forgot I was on the headset today. Someone's in the background. Thank you for joining us, Sharon.
Hi. Glad to be here. How are you
Thanks
guys
so
doing?
much. Hopefully everyone is doing great and they're all rested. I gave them a little break so that everyone would be very attentive to you. We're super grateful for your time. Yeah.
Oh, well, good. I'm glad to be here. Always love to talk about my research.
Great. So
Wow.
I had folks review your bio, and I introduced them a little bit to your research on African diaspora, indigeneity, intersectional feminism, ecology, critical race pedagogy, Black geographies, and environmental justice. And I mentioned that you had talked about being interested in educating folks about or work you're doing on coastal fishing communities and climate change. So that's the intro they have and the context they have for you. So if you want to give them any more context and take it from there, that would be super.
Okay. And will I be able to share my screen?
I'm going to click on it right now. All right. Do folks want to say thank you or welcome in the chat or unmute?
I see some. Hello, everyone. Glad to be here. Hi.
Hello, welcome.
Thank you. So, as Caitlin said, I do research around fishing in fishing communities. And what I look at is what are some cultural practices that help folks demonstrate their resilience and enable them to live autonomously. And my case study focuses on Indigenous groups in coastal areas in South Carolina and also in California. The case study we'll talk about today is South Carolina. We'll look at the Gullah Geechee and the work that they're doing. And the reason I'm going to focus on the Gullah today is because we also want to look at how Blackness is constructed in sort of dominant narratives. And it's usually through scales of economic deprivation, right? And so whenever you associate any activity with Blackness, you're thinking about poverty, you're thinking about loss, you're thinking about dependency. And so that's actually how I started my research. I was led by the dominant narrative, and I went out to these places in South Carolina, which is beautiful, the Sea Islands. I worked on St. Helena Island. I have to make sure I'm pronouncing it right because you say it very differently in South Carolina than you do in California. One St. Helena and one St. Helena. There's Kaylin, got the Gullah Geechee corridor up there. Thank you.
I figured there would be pictures on the website as you're talking about these islands, but I didn't find the pictures yet. So
okay. And so what I found when I actually went out there is that this whole concept of poverty and loss and economic deprivation was not their narrative. It was something completely different. And the reason that their way of life and their ideology was somewhat invisible to greater areas is that it's not cash-based. It's a exchange and sharing system. And so that's what we'll talk about today, on how they do that. And ultimately sort of tying this to, well, if they are not able to do this, how does that affect their autonomy? So if they're not able to continue the fishing practices, if they don't have access to the land, but more importantly, if they're not a part of the financial analysis that looks for economic development, how are those conditions affected, right? And so if folks don't know the value of the work that they're doing or the way that they live, then a lot of times those practices are ignored. So let's see. Pull up my screen.
Just
So-
confirming we see it.
Perfect. You never know with technology, right? Okay, so we'll talk a little bit about indigenous ontologies. And this is just a different way of life. It's a different way to think about how you relate to the land and how you relate to people that's outside of a capitalist model, a capitalist system. And so it throws people because it's hard for them to link into how that's sustainable. And so we'll talk about how that's sustainable. So the Gullah Geechee are an indigenous population in the Americas. They're in the United States, in the South Carolina, on the Barrier Islands. They were able to retain a lot of their autonomy because of the remoteness of the islands. And so these islands didn't interact as much with the mainland. So they have their own language, they have their own traditions, and they have a different belief system that doesn't include poverty. And so when folks label them as poor, they immediately reject this. So we don't know anything about poverty. That has nothing to do with who we are. And actually it derailed me for 2 years when I was doing my research, because all my research focused on poverty and poverty frameworks and how to alleviate poverty. And when I actually went into the field and started working with the community, I says, we have no idea what that means. That's not a part of our ontology. That's not a part of our knowledge system. And so I had to relearn it, how to relate to the individuals out there, which was good. And so when I restructured what I was doing, I found 3 primary areas that they were operating out of. Reciprocity, that look within their livelihood frameworks and how they shared, that's not focused on exchange of money. Now, it's not that they don't know these systems. So we don't want to get the idea, because when you think about indigenous communities, this idea you want to connect them with being primitive, right? And that they don't evolve. And so that's not the case. It's actually recognizing what works within the 2 systems, how they use them, but more so how they maintain their own traditions and practices that are sustained in that space. And I think they're able to sustain it in the Carolinas because it is an island, right? And that's why it's also a bigger concern because of the climate change. So a lot of the island is eroding, sea level rise, and the effect that will have on their ability to continue to fish in those communities. And then it also looks at cooperation. So how do they maintain access to the land through partnerships that they have locally with other fishers, with people who live in that space? So the idea, one of the guiding principles for the Gullah is that if one person has access to the land, everyone in that community has access to the land, which is very different, right? We tend to want to put up fences and really demarcate our space, right? So we know where our property is. But within the Gullah tradition, what they tend to do is if they have access to the shoreline, then the people in the communities have access to the shoreline. So that's been a little contentious lately because there's a lot, it's a beautiful place. And so a lot of tourists are coming into the space and buying up land. And the first thing they do is they put up those fences. And so, I mean, if you ever want to start an argument with the folks on the islands, just talk to them about a fence. And that's just something they just, that just upsets them to such a degree. So it's reciprocity, sharing, cooperation are the main areas that they focus around. And this is the particular island. So there are several islands along the East Coast, Southeast section. There's 100 barrier islands that have similar communities. I focused on St. Helena Island, that has a lot of the cultural preservation centers on the space. So let's see. And so what they do is they fish, and they fish at 3 different levels. And so I also did a gendered analysis because I wanted to see how the resource was being used. What I focus on is how people relate to the land, the connection between the environment and society. So that's my background. I'd look at people in the environment. A lot of processes in our disciplines, approaches in environmental science take the people out. And so it was very important to me that I focus on the human aspect. What are the people doing? How they're using the land? How does that affect their ability to sustain themselves? And so what I saw in this space is that there were 3 different levels of extracting the resources, harvesting the resources in those spaces. And it was done at the familial level and the commercial level, and then a space in between. Now at the familial level, this is generally where the women harvest. This is along the shoreline. They're going out with nets, with pole fishing, crab baskets, anything that they can use from the shore is how they're gathering their harvest. Now, this is done to the extent that meals are prepared around the tides. So they set out baskets in the morning for crab that they're going to eat at dinner. They actually go and cast nets during the shifting morning tides to bring in shrimp for breakfast. So the idea of even going to relying on a fish market or a store is not a part of how they relate to the space and sustaining themselves. And so the women do this. It doesn't mean that they're doing this outside of traditional occupations. They may do this before they go to work in another profession, but it is the food that they rely on, right? And so this is at a smaller scale. They harvest food that will feed the family. The commercial fisher, on the other hand, is harvesting at a much higher level. He has access to more technical equipment. He has access to boats. He has access to larger areas with that equipment. And so his basis within the fisheries is looking at how he's harvesting with for commercial, how he's harvesting for commercial needs, but he's also using the surplus to distribute within the community. So there's still an exchange, even at the commercial level. All of the fish that is caught at for the commercial oyster person is not used at that level. Some is always sustained or maintained to distribute within this community. Now, this is a small community. It's only, this particular island, there's only about 9,000 people. 5,000 of those now are new tourists, recreational residents in the area. So there has been a shift in how the resources have been used, but their knowledge actually allows them to continue these practices because there's levees and streams and sounds that aren't familiar to the tourists. And so they're still able to maintain that autonomy, although it's being threatened by the level of development that's happening. And then the third person I talk about is the in-between. So he moves in between the women who are fishing on the shore and the commercial fisher, not necessarily using, relying on commercial exchange or cash exchange. He's also working full-time, maybe, this, one of my key informants worked full-time doing social work, but he also did harvesting every evening and every weekend. And that harvesting that he did of the crab was exchanged with women on the island. And then this added to their supply of fish that could be distributed and used in other enterprises. And so one of the other enterprises that the women use through this exchange that they're able to do with the fisher that's in between is to work with the tourists. The tourists like to hire them as for catering. And they also like to buy the goods. And so we're looking at ways that you can market the goods in those particular spaces. So this is how it's being sustained. That is not completely a formal system. This is an informal system that allows the community to live autonomously, that is not a part of the standard economic system, so falls outside of analyses that looks at how to improve economic development in these spaces. And so you're not going to hear a lot about them, unfortunately. Or maybe not so, unfortunately, maybe not. And so one of the things that I heard constantly in this space is that, we fish for food. It's not recreational. And do you have an idea what I mean by that? Whether, fishing recreationally versus fishing for your daily practice. And another word I'm going to throw out that's also rejected is subsistence. They don't buy this idea of subsistence. So how do you talk about it in that regard? That, we're fishing for food. And we're not recreational fishers. Does that have any meaning for, I see something in the chat, let's see. Any meaning for folks? Sustenance, yes. And this is something common that I found with working in Indigenous populations in Northern California, here close to us in Lake County and in Mendocino counties, where it's cultural, is what I was reaching for. It's a part of who they are. And so when you ask folks about these practices, none of them identify as fishers. They don't say that they're fishers. But every day that I was there, and every time that I was with different groups, they fished. And they prepared these meals that were integral part of how they sustained themselves. But they're not identifying as subsistence fishers. They're not identifying as fishers. And they're not identifying that this space is a part of how they're sustained. So you see how this can be challenging, because they're seeing this as an integral part of who they are, but not as something separate as a vocation or profession. And so it's not going to be in your city planning or economic development analysis, was the point that I wanted to make. So when I was there, this idea that there's no homelessness. Food is everywhere, in the creeks, in the marsh, in the sea. I can build something back in the woods and never be hungry. So a lot of the concepts I had to dispense with, that they could go to the sea line, the shoreline, and harvest whatever they needed. They could build end spaces before tourism has been continued to encroach in these areas. So that's a common thing, right? That's a common thing. But the idea is that they can live actually very sustainably off the land. Now, I don't want to romanticize this idea that people are, living off the land with no connections to reality. So that's a way that might, that indigenous populations are constructed. That's not the idea. The idea is to look at how they actually exist, but more so to look at their belief system. And their belief system is looking at the well-being of everybody in that community. So if one person has resources, every individual has resources. And if you don't have access to the land, that threatens that collaboration, right? And so no one was hungry. And this is the way it was distributed. So you could actually go outside of these spaces, which is common. There's small islands, there's not a lot of industry there. Folks go in and out. So you have the common fisher who provides resources for their immediate household, but they also provide resources for people who move away, right? And so if you lived in California, your relatives would send regular packages of seafood to you from the islands. And the relatives relied on this. The other thing that I want to point out is when I say relative and when I say family, I'm not talking about biological. It's very different. I'm talking about who the community determines is a part of that family. So another concept that's different. Another part of that concept that says we determine our identity, we determine who belong, we determine who's supported. And we are doing this through a different sort of model, right? Is there a belief system why they don't unionize their fishing harvesting? Unionize? Unionize. So that's putting a sort of a different context to it, right? So it's structuring it in a way that you're looking at particular governance. You're looking at a hierarchical way of looking at the resources that need to be monitored, right? Or gain government support. So my question would be, and was, what sort of relationship do they want with the government? So there's always the assumption that folks want to have a relationship with the government to get these resources. What the main goal is to be able to continue to do the harvesting in those spaces, to continue to have access to the land. That's the main focus, to continue to have access to the land. So in some regard, Tiffany, they do work with elected officials. So they work with Representative Clyburn to actually set aside a lot of the land on the coast. It's called the Gullah Geechee. I think you put up Caitlin, you put up the corridor. The Gullah Geechee Cultural Heritage Corridor stretches 5 through 5 states. And that land is preserved. The idea is for it to preserve the cultural heritage of the Gullah. The problem sometimes with the government's partnership is that it's not funded. So sure, that's been set aside, but what resources have been attached to that in order to help that space be preserved and maintained? There is some partnerships that they're doing with the National Park Service. But then again, the formality of working in that structure has not been their priority. It's part of the necessity, but it's not a priority, right? So they have fees, they share food, they share knowledge, and they work on a small scale. And they think about this very differently. How they don't need to have these formal structures, how their families always sustain themselves, how the community always work together. And so this is what I continue to uncover in these spaces, is who's working with whom and how is the food being distributed and how are they sustaining themselves. They are tapping into government as needed, but trying to minimize that involvement or create these collaborations in a way that they are at the table making these decisions and not just invited after the decisions have been made, which is what happens in most cases, right? And so this is the island. I want to end with that beautiful picture of where they do a lot of the harvesting and fishing and knowledge of the tributaries allow them to continue to have access to resources that sustain them in these spaces. And the challenge right now is that they're losing access to these shorelines because of erosion from climate change. And so I'm working with them now to see, what does that look like? What do they want? Rather than coming in as a researcher and say, this is what I believe are the best strategies for you. Our team comes in and asks, how do you see this system evolving? What would you like to occur? And that's how we work. We work from what their needs are and how we can be a resource. So are there any questions about the Gullah that you might have and how they work? How they exist, I should say.
I do. Do they have designated leaders? Like, how do they for like who do you talk to specifically? Is it a group of people, or are there specific people that communicate about these things?
So that's the other hard part. I don't know who was talking. Was that Lindsay?
Yes.
So the difficulty in going into different communities with different cultures is to avoid coming in with preconceived notions of how those societies exist. So this hierarchy of leadership is something that we would assume would exist, but not necessarily so. So when folks tend to come into sort of traditionally into indigenous communities, government agencies would come in and they would identify leaders, right? Not leaders that the indigenous populations had identified, but leaders that the agencies felt that they could work with, right? And so very differently, I went in when I conducted my research there. I didn't necessarily ask who the leaders were. I asked about the practices and who was conducting the practices. And so that led me to certain people. And, 4,000 or 5,000 people is pretty still small community, right? And so you would meet some of the same people who knew a lot about the land, right? Or a lot about the resources, and different people knew different parts of the island. And so there were areas where folks had specific expertise, I would say, but not necessarily identified as leaders.
Okay, thank you.
Which makes it difficult, right? It's like, well, who do you go and talk to?
Right.
But it's finding out, what do you want to know, and then identifying who in the community has that information, right? And so I did it by just sort of sitting in spaces that they frequented. I went to the fishing spots that I was familiar with, or I became familiar with. And then sort of did a snowball approach where people would identify other folks who did certain types of cultural practices that I was interested in. So there wasn't just one person, because the challenge with that is if you rely on one leader, you're going to get the same narrative. And that's what derailed me initially, is that I was relying on the literature that talked about this place that was conducted in some instances from researchers who had not even visited the space, right? And so I didn't want to continue to perpetuate knowledge about a place that wasn't representative of the population's knowledge. And so it was very important to me to situate myself in that space so that it could be my narrative could be more reflective of the reality that was occurring in that space. Have they started doing anything different because of erosion? Do you see the idea that they will go for what types of cultural practice did they see? So erosion is a big problem, Shannon. And what they're doing is they're having to move further inland. So the island is literally eroding away. I mean, it's not that large of an island, and it's eroding away. And so it's limiting, particularly for women, the amount of harvest that women can conduct, because women are shore-based fishers. I also saw this in California when we had that long drought. It affected a lot of the indigenous populations who relied on the tule reeds in our coastal areas, because they created the baskets from them, right? And so they harvest these baskets, but because of the drought, they were no longer there. And again, it was the women who were doing this work. And so yes, they're seeing that they have to adapt to where they can harvest. So the type of harvest that they are able to extract has changed, because you're going to have different species on the coast versus on the tributaries, right? And so they're adapting to that. But they're also talking to legislators and saying, what sort of things can be done to preserve. Now, what they do to mitigate is a lot of times they return and restore oyster beds. That's a part of their practice. So then they're not completely reliant on government agencies. Every time they harvest, so all of those shelves that you saw, they will restore to these spaces. So these harvest beds can recolonize. So, but the rate of the erosion has been challenging lately, right? And so there has to be sort of a broader approach, and having the community be an integral part of that discussion on what they want that to look like. Excuse me. Now, the cultural practices that we saw was the main cultural practice that I saw, that I revealed, was this kinship network of distribution. How, you know, the familiar fisher, the crabber that in the morning always had fish or always had some sort of seafood that would distribute it to anybody in her household, but then anybody surrounding her household, so in that neighborhood. And then they had a weekly feast where everyone would bring food to this feast, right? And so food was distributed in that way. And at the feast, the other two harvesters, so the in between and the commercial fisher, would also contribute to that feast. And so this was a place where they could eat, they could learn about the well-being of all the community members, and it was a time to relax. And so this is a normal occurrence that happens in the community. So that was the main one that I found, Tiffany.
Nice, thank you.
You're welcome. Eat, learn, and relax. Yes. So feel free to click on the link that Caitlin provided. It's an excellent resource. They're doing a lot of work. You're not going to find a lot, and that's intentional. They don't want. I've been designated an honorary Gullah because I have to be. When you conduct research, and you guys have probably already heard this from your professor, when you conduct research, oftentimes they train you to be objective and remove from the population or the subjects that you're studying. Well, the Gullah have no intention of allowing that at all. This is, if you want to know about us, you are going to do everything that we do. So I learned to crab while I was out there, which was wonderful. And so let me see if I can answer this last question. Let's see, is there a way to consider the Indigenous perspective in a manner that brings inclusivity, prepares the future through problem solving while sharing the respectful practices, preserving, respecting the environment? There is, Jaden, but it's not one particular strategy, right? There's going to be, it depends on the area, it depends on the group, and it depends on what they want to occur, and what sort of relationship that they want. And it's not something that you can essentialize across all Indigenous groups, right? Because they're going to relate to the space, and they're going to relate to the collaborations that they want differently. Some people want to have these collaborations, others don't want to have that interaction. So it would be specific on the group, and even within the Gullah, you're going to have that diversity of information and knowledge also on how involved folks want to be. It took me 2 years before folks actually built some sort of trust that allowed me into closer circles, which became challenging for me because the more that they began to trust me, the more that they began to speak Gullah, which actually I thought I understood until they actually began to speak true Gullah. And I can't understand a word of it. So this summer, I'm hoping to take a class in Gullah so that I can at least understand it a little better. Tiffany's
hand is up. Oh, go ahead.
Okay. I didn't know if Tiffany's hand was up or from before.
Oh, that was from before.
Okay,
Thank you.
whose hand? So somebody else?
Nope, I think you got it. I don't see. Oh, Isael, sorry.
Isabel? Yes.
Yeah, I was wondering, so what is the population, like numbers looking like for these communities over there? Are they decreasing because of the erosion, or are they just becoming more and more, I guess, tighter? More,
Interesting enough is that their population is pretty stable. What changes is the influx of tourists and recreational vacation owners who buy up the land. And so, they've been around 4 or 5,000 for years, for decades. But now we have a huge influx of tourists who love the place and they bought a lot of the homes. And of course they want the waterfront homes, right? And so when you have tourists coming in buying the waterfront homes, that limits the access that they have. And so they've been successful in writing and getting a few ordinances passed that limits the amount of development that can occur, as a means of preserving access to the shoreline.
Can I jump in there? So the only context I knew about this in was a podcast I listened to about the land grabs and the stealing of land by the developers.
Right.
So, and I only learned about the folks there in the context of they had traditional ways of passing property down. But when these developers came in, they exploited some of the loopholes in the law to steal the land from them, not compensate them by saying, oh, you didn't pay for these taxes and things like that. So that was the only part of their story I knew. But I imagine as people are thinking, well, as tourists are moving in and folks are being displaced, is that affecting their I think you're talking about ontologies, cultural practices, ways of being, of knowing, or whatever. And I think it's particularly it's worse than just if they were benefiting from selling land or choosing to sell land. It's depriving them of these generational holdings that is making them less able to live there as well. So that I appreciate learning all this stuff. That was the only context I knew, and it just came up at the end to be relevant. So
Right. So you're talking about air property, and that
Mhm.
adds to the land loss. And that is a big issue. And so this is, you have to put that in historical context, because the Gullah Geechee are descendants of African slaves, right? And so a lot of the Gullah have been on that land for 6 generations or more, right? And so the land was passed down through the families without formal title. And developers, and so you could have, I think one case I was looking at had 118 relatives on the title, but you only need one person to agree to sell to lose that land. And so developers were finding these individuals who may have never even set foot on the land. A lot of times, they're from places, actually from California, from Texas, that they're distant relatives that decide to sell the land, and it forces a sale of the entire property through the air property. L property. And so there's a couple of agencies out there, organizations, I would say, that are trying to work with folks on ways that they can avoid losing land at this level. So that's separate, that's different. That's the land loss through, developers. And then there's the land loss through, whether it's a land loss through unscrupulous sales, I would say. And then there's land loss through development. Let's see. Is there a way? How do we as students go about ways of creating opportunities within our communities to learn and work alongside Indigenous? That's a good question, Joe. So I think there's a lot going on through the hub. I've been referred to the hub quite a bit on practice or events that are occurring with Indigenous communities right here in Sonoma and in the Santa Rosa area. I would check with them first, and then also in the Indigenous Studies Department, Native Studies Department, they have event calendars that might be able to tie you in to events that are occurring around the Bay Area. Let's see, how helpful is legislation, land grabs? Legislation is fine. I think a lot of your questions is looking at sort of the formal structures, and they don't necessarily work with the formal structures, which is also difficult because this is how we've been trained to sort of address issues. And so part of them are looking at the formal structure because you have to, otherwise they're losing the land. And so they've made some partnerships with legislators like Claiborne, Representative Claiborne, who has been able to preserve a lot of the land in that space. The other thing is raising awareness. So they have an annual, the Gullah is I'm talking about. The Gullah have an annual heritage days that allows folks from all over the country to come and see what their culture and what they're doing. So raising awareness helps to encourage sort of the preservation of that space and supports it in that way too. And so it's looking outside of formal structures in terms of how do we increase awareness of our cultural practices, but not to the extent that they're jeopardized. And so all the knowledge about how they exist is not going to be disclosed. Like, that's the way they keep their autonomy. They know where the best places to fish. They know how to adapt to the erosion, but there's only so much adaptation you can do on an island, right? So that's got to be a concern. So that's part of the discussion that's happening at a local level. And so you want it to come from the community. You want them to say, well, how do you want this to proceed? What outcomes would you like to see? Okay. Well, it's been
Thank you so
wonderful
much.
talking to you all. I hope that was helpful.
We appreciate your time. Thank you for joining us. Do folks want to
you.
give a round of applause? Yay.
Yeah.
Thank you, Ms.
Absolutely.
Fuller.
That was awesome. Thank you so
All
much.
right. Bye.
Bye. All right, so in the time we have, we can do some reflection on that or Q&A, or we can just break into breakout rooms and folks can edit each other's papers. Last week, only 4 people turned them in. This week, not many people turned them in, so I don't know what's going on with your drafts, but hopefully you all have drafts that are at the point where you're ready to share and get input. So do folks want to check in about Professor Fuller's research and any thoughts about ways of being and concepts of existence and reality, or about fishing practices? Or do folks have any other thoughts they want to share or questions?
I just thought it was really nice to hear an alternative way of life than what we're used to. It was nice to hear that.
Yeah, agreed.
I'm curious, did you come into contact with her work in the local Indigenous community here?
Yeah, she came on the tour of Great and Rancheria, and that's when I first met her. Yeah. Okay, so so there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 of you. Are all 6 of you ready for reviewing each other's? Oh no, there's 7. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 students. Are you all ready to exchange papers? If we do breakout rooms and get edits on your paper and then turn in an edited version? Crickets.
Sure.
Great. And some of you also didn't turn in your guest question. So make sure you turn it in and get your points. So there's 3 drafts that got uploaded. I guess I will leave you to figuring out how to exchange drafts. I will break you into breakout rooms. I will do 3 breakout rooms. Tiffany and Tanya can just stay in the main room with me. And then there will be 3 people in one room, 1, 2, 3. No, I will do 4 breakout rooms. So there will be either be 2 or 3 of you. 1, 2, 1, 2. If Tanya and I don't accept, I think that will work. Okay, great. Okay, so when you're done, we'll be in the main room, but you could just go ahead and call it a day and do your weekly feedback, and we'll see you next week for our last guest. Okay, so if everyone other than Tiffany and Tanya can accept. Oh, well, move Tiffany back to the main session. Sorry, Tiffany, I was trying to get you in our session, not in the other room, but then I put us all in a room to break up the students.
No problem.
All right. So do we want to check in, or do you folks just want to do your own work on Tanya with the guest baskets, Tiffany with the video?
I'm actually curious on on our guest speaker, and like, do we plan to work with her in the future? I'm sure, and with all her work that she does locally, I think that's pretty awesome.
Yeah, we want to invite her to be a speaker next time?
I think it'd be great. And I think it definitely got the students' attention with like asking about like, yeah, the indigenous community. I think there was a question about Sonoma State and how, or Sonoma, indigenous people around Sonoma, and how the students could work with them.
Mm-hmm.
And so it seemed like it was interesting across.
Yeah, I'm trying to click on her bio right now. Sorry. I think I'd originally talked to her maybe about presenting at Social Justice Week, but she came to the class. I can't remember exactly, but I'm trying to find her. She teaches in like 4 different departments, so I'm trying to find her her actual bio, but I can add her to the list.
Yeah, and it kind of just reminded me, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, what skill in our theme would we want to invite her to talk about? Our theme of...
Okay. Yeah, I think that's like, yeah, it's kind of a segue, I guess. So, I mean, I was just in this ecology class today, and they were talking about actually working with people who studied ecology, not just with animal and plant species, but with also people. And so I think that's an interesting topic even across departments, that and it seems like she has that niche of including that into her like analysis, even like scientifically and stuff. So if that can be like a little edge,
Yeah,
I don't know exactly what would be the tool, but I'm sure there's a lot there, right?
Definitely.
As I was listening, I was checking on my hen. Her name is Mole, actually, like the food. But yeah, so we did find an egg. So there was like an egg there. So we are trying, but we'll see. But she is relaxed, and but she does seem like she has a good temperament right now. So
that's good.
Yeah.
She wants help.
Yeah, thanks, Tanya.
Oops, I'm sending that to the wrong person. Here's her academia page. But I just can't find her bio on all of the many websites she's on. Sonoma. So would we want her to talk about like, what does it mean to do culturally responsive research? Like, what does it mean to I don't think it's participatory action research, but in thinking about how we're trying to do empowerment through social justice, like, are we going to ask her to talk about uplifting voices of people on their own terms? Like, what would we want?
Yeah, I like that idea. Tiffany's, I think she accidentally,
It's Mole.
probably. That's such a cute name. I like the idea of asking about like her research, like her experience as a researcher and how she connects with the people that she's working with. And yeah, I'm like reading her,
Like conducting responsible research,
yeah, like her little bio. Like,
how
it's
to
really
support
interesting.
social movements through research.
Yeah, that might be cool if we did like a panel of some sorts.
Cool. All right. Well, do you want to just go ahead and wrap up your sending the invites or sending the following up with Amal and Tori and Erica about the packages?
Yeah, I was gonna do that right now.
Great. Why don't you go ahead and do that? And I'll just, oh, I didn't stop recording already. Whoops.